Hi, and thank you for listening to Season 2, Episode number 12 of The Fix, giving you education, solutions, and troubleshooting for the baseball pitcher, featuring pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. I am your host, Joe Janish, publisher of OnBaseball.com, as well as MetsToday.com, which is part of ESPN's Sweet Spot Network. For those of you who are listening for the first time, you may be wondering what makes Angel Borrelli a pitching motion expert. Well, Angel holds a master's degree in sports science. She's been a strength and conditioning coach for 35 years. For the past 20 years, she's been laser-focused on examining pitching deliveries, and pitchers from the little leagues all the way to the big leagues go to Angel to find the solution that will take them to the next level. She also works with pitchers recovering from injuries, giving them customized training programs that get them back on the mound, while also finding and correcting the flaws that led to the injury in the first place. So let's get Angel on the line and get our show started.
Joe.
Hey, Angel, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Joe. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. So last week in Season 2, Episode 11 of The Fix, we interviewed our special guest, Dr. Glenn Fleissig, the research director for the ASMI. I would say it was an enlightening discussion, and I encourage all of our listeners to go back and listen to Episode 11 when you have a chance. You can find it archived at both Blog Talk Radio and on baseball.com. It's been 2 weeks of special guests, so we're getting back to our old format, which I don't really want to call an old format, but our standard format. And what I want to do is get started with talking about a few injuries. Angel, I can't believe it. In the past week, there's already been like another 8 major league pitchers have gone down, or I think it's even more. I just heard that Adam Ottavino, Domingo Tapia, Homer Bailey, Alex Cobb, Matt McGill all had Tommy John surgery this past week. Jason Vargas has a strained flexor. Jordan Walden has a muscle strain in his right shoulder. DrewSmyly has a labrum tear, and the one in particular, maybe some people saw this gruesome video. Jarrod Parker, the Oakland Athletics pitcher who's been coming back from Tommy John surgery himself, in the middle of a rehab start, he threw a pitch, and it looked like his arm broke just in the middle of the pitch. And from what I understand, he had what's called an avulsion fracture of the medial epicondyle. I don't know if I'm even saying that correctly, but somehow I remember when I was a kid, I think I was about 14 or 15, and I had some elbow issues, and the doctor said I had medial epicondylitis. I don't know if that's the same thing. He said it was like little league elbow or tennis elbow or something like that. But I mean, from what I understand, this is not a terribly common thing to happen to pitchers, but maybe you can shed some light on this injury, and maybe you could pronounce the words correctly, because I don't think I got them right. But maybe you could just give us a little background on what happened to Jarrod Parker.
Yeah, actually, you did a pretty good job. So the medial epicondyle is a location. So if you have medial epicondylitis, it means that your medial epicondyle is inflamed, and that's very common, especially in youth pitchers. The epicondyle is actually a bony protrusion on the end of a bone. So if you've ever bought a fake dog bone for your dog, it's not just a straight thing. It's got it's got bony prominences at the end. Or even if you look at the leg of a chicken, when you're eating chicken, the bone itself, it's not just a straight tubular sort of structure. There's a rounded end. It's big, and
right
on those ends are protrusions. And the protrusions in the epicondyles are where muscles actually attach to, because the muscles attach near the end of bones so that we create our lever system. The medial epicondyle means it's on the inside of the elbow. And the medial epicondyle, and it was also of the humerus bone, and the humerus bone is the large upper arm bone. So it would be above the elbow crease. So as you know, when they do Tommy John surgery, they are connecting and reattaching and doing all sorts of different things to the ligaments. And remember, ligaments attach bone to bone. So the ligament, when they reattach it or they create a new one or however they do it, they anchor it into the ends of the bone. That anchoring itself, just the process of it, weakens the bone. And so now we've got another structure inside the body that's actually healing. So when you are rehabbing a Tommy John injury, you need to do all the levels, be cognizant of all the levels of healing that needs to happen, would be, that you need to strengthen the bone, which is done by bone strengthen when they're pulled on. That's why we walk, and it strengthens our bones. Contraction of a muscle pulls on the bone, and that actually creates bone growth. So during the rehab process, when you're rehabbing Tommy John, you're not just doing band work and all this other stuff. You're also doing strength training. And what you're doing is not just developing that bone, but you're also helping the muscles get stronger that surround the bone. So what happened with him, and it was awful. Wow. And he did. You're right. He broke his arm. Because of the forces at the moment of releasing the ball, or prior to it, and then during the release, is when that bone fractured. That's why it looked like his arm bent in a really unusual way. So now he's in trouble, because when they go in, they may have to, they may have to do a third Tommy John on him. When the bone fractures like that, and a avulsion fracture is a pretty serious one. He's in some trouble right now. And so this is an important, the teaching moment from this is that, and I'm assuming that they did this, but when you're rehabbing Tommy John, you go through a series of stages with rehab, going from hardly doing anything, where the PT might just be moving the elbow. From that, you progress to certain types of, you're using all kinds of modalities, but you're also doing band work and non-invasive things. But you absolutely have to progress to serious strength training around the elbow. This is why I wrote my elbow book, not just for pitchers that are healthy, but for pitchers to stay healthy, but because the muscles, which get bad press sometimes. It's like, we don't want anybody to be too bulky. Well, you can train for strength without getting bulky. Getting bulky, I don't know what that means, but there's nothing wrong with size. But let's put it this way. No matter what you're doing, trying to stay healthy or rehabbing, you have to address the outer surface of the body, which are the muscles. The muscles protect the bones, and the bones protect the ligaments. I've said this more than once. There's 3 levels of defense. So strength training the muscles helps prevent things happening to the bone. It's why even kids should do it, because their bones are so weak. You have to be careful how you do it, because the muscles are pulling on bones. So at the same time, they're making them strong. So you have to really do well-designed programs, and you have to have correct technique. So with Tommy John rehab, that has to be an ending step. And sometimes pitchers, if they're not really, forward like some of our younger pitchers are who've been lifting weights since they were 12, may think that, I've had an injured elbow, so I better be careful with it. Well, you can't be careful with your elbow. You need to be careful with how you train, what you do, and how you do it. But you can't just say, I'm going to just do bands and I'm just going to, throw, because the muscles themselves have to be developed. So the take-home message from this is that things can happen at any time for any reason, but what you want to be sure and do is cover all the bases so you don't look back and go, oh, boy. Because when you see someone coming off of Tommy John, their arm will actually be smaller than their other arm, because muscles atrophy quickly, especially when they're braced and then they're not used. So this is an important moment to know that training should never stop, and that you always need to be protecting the inside by working with the outside as well. And this is not a good thing for Jarrod Parker right now. I feel badly for him, because now if he has to have another surgery, he's going to weaken another part of the bone, and then he's got to heal the bone, which they heal pretty quickly, but now he probably will be rehabbing another ligament surgery. So we'll be all waiting to hear how serious it was. They won't know till they go in to actually determine what's happening.
You know, this, I think you already know this. This was his second Tommy John surgery. He had his first one in 2009.
Yeah.
And you know, I did a little digging myself, and according to one of the reports, or one of the research reports done by Dr. James Andrews, out of 743 patients who had Tommy John surgery, only 5 of them had this kind of a fracture. So it's pretty rare, but at the same time, I mean, I don't know, does it have anything to do with the fact that he already had it was his second Tommy John surgery, I mean, because he was already maybe a little weakened, or is it, I mean, he just had the surgery last March, so he's about a year after the surgery. Did he come back too soon? Like, are those considerations as well?
Well, let me see, excuse me. I think I checked. I think his Tommy John surgery last year was in March. Now, my April Tommy John, I had some guys referred to me for returning to play. They had surgery last April. April is a popular month for Tommy Johns. They're all getting ready to report for college summer teams right now. So they're about 12, 13 months out. So he had it last March. So he's on time in terms of when I guess he was going to return to the majors in 10 days, which is really sad for him. Doesn't sound like they were rushing it. Is he vulnerable because he had 2? Well, let's put it this way. They're anchoring something into the bone, and they usually have to use the bone. I'm sure that they don't use the same spot, but so that's a good point. But to me, if you have something that goes wrong more than once, you have to really be diligent about finding the cause. And because to have it a second time means you repeated something, because they're doing too good of a job with the surgery. So there's only 2 ways it can go. The surgery isn't successful, or you're doing the same thing, which makes the surgeon's work not successful. So what he's doing is throwing and pitching. So I don't know what happened between the first and second, but the second should have set off alarms. Now, that's where the prior history has an effect, probably more so than on that the surgery itself left him vulnerable in the bone. The doctors are too smart. And plus, the bone had to have healed because he didn't fracture it between the first and second. So something is amiss and something is awry, and the doctor could probably better answer that question. But I would think more about the sociological factors, meaning what he was doing, how he does it, that could have created the problem. I mean, let's face it in life. I don't care what subject we're talking about. If you do something once and it has a bad result, that's bad. If you do the same thing and get the same result second time, well, alarms should be going off. If it happens a third time and it's worse, well, you do have to start to look at what's the cause if you haven't done it so far. But, this is not good, and he's only 26 years old. He's going to heal real well, but this puts him really behind the 8 ball right now.
Yeah, and exactly what you said was reinforced last week by Dr. Fleisig. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And it really begs to the question really is has anyone really taken a look at what Jarrod Parker's been doing with his mechanics and with his training, and has he it's, at this point I think it's time to maybe look at that. Yeah, and I have something I want to say. The strength training thing, in addition to the points I've already made, when we have a pitcher that is returning to play and he has an injury, I'm not saying we consciously go out and do this, but on our menu of what we're doing to help him return to play, we are always, designing things so that if there is something still going on, we find out before he releases a ball. Because no matter what you do, the forces releasing a ball are the greatest.
So I can't be in the gym and give an elbow workout that's going to duplicate those forces. But what I can do is keep loading and testing that elbow in a secure environment to find out if I put this load on his elbow, is he healing from it? Is he showing that the muscle's getting stronger? In other words, he's doing, let's say, an exercise, and let's say he's using a 25-pound dumbbell for it. And let's say the first time he does it, he's so sore. Maybe he went from 15, 20 to 25. He's so sore. 2 weeks later, he's reporting, wow, I'm not getting sore at all. My elbow feels strong. And so then you keep increasing the load. So we are then saying to ourselves, wow, cool. The elbow's getting strong. This is exactly the way the joint works in pitching. So while I can't have him release a ball to test him, I'm testing it now. Now, if this guy says, my arm just won't get better, well, we drop the weight down just like we do with the throwing. Drop the distance back. And until he's showing signs that there's an adaptation inside the body, the tissue's actually changing, that muscle's actually stronger, and we know it because today he did this weight and he got really sore, and then tomorrow he did a different weight and he didn't get sore. We know there's progress. So when we send him to play, we've done all that we can. So when we say test it out, lay things out, and go through all the stages and don't eliminate strength training, it's because that's our best way of saying, you know what, we've done all we can off the field. And he showed signs of improvement. So did he do that? I don't know. Will he need to do it in the future? Absolutely. Absolutely. My guess is, I mean, I'm not the only one that knows this. They've got, pretty good people working for teams, but this is a step. So if anybody listening has a pitcher that's rehabbing an injury and is hesitant, when the time is right and done the right way and with the right program, that step cannot be missed. So that step plus finding the cause. Those are the two most important things, finding the cause of the original injury and taking the steps of rehab from something that's uninvasive to something that is invasive, just so that you really test things out before you throw the ball. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah, and you're talking about strength and conditioning. It just so happens that you authored a book called Engineering the Pitching Elbow that can be found on your website, gymscience.com, that has loads of whole training program to strengthen the elbow. And I don't think that all these things are happening as a coincidence, and we're not talking about elbows just because you wrote an elbow book. And in fact, just so that people don't think that, I want to move the conversation over to someone who has a shoulder issue. DrewSmyly, who I mentioned before, pitcher for the Tampa Bay Rays, he was the key individual in the trade last year that when the Tigers acquired David Price, the Cy Young Award winner. So DrewSmyly has been diagnosed with a torn labrum in his pitching shoulder. He's likely going to need season-ending surgery. I went back and I took a look at the timeline of what happened with DrewSmyly going back to spring training this year. On February 25th, that early, as soon as he reported, he was on a different pitching program or throwing program than everyone else. And I don't know exactly why, but, they said on February 25th that he's on a different throwing program than the rest of the Tampa Bay pitchers. He would throw bullpen sessions every third day instead of every other day, which is what the other pitchers were doing. And then he was scheduled to make his first exhibition appearance at some point March 10th or March 11th. Well, 2 weeks later, it's March 8th, and suddenly he has a shoulder problem. And they were saying it was something, as they always do. They said, this is just something minor, a little setback. They called it shoulder tendinitis back on March 8th. Okay, so then they ramped up his exercises, whatever that means, back on March 9th. He started to do sock throwing on March 10th. I'm not entirely clear on what that is. He played catch on March 14th. On March 18th, he threw again. On March 19th, he played catch from 100 feet. He had a bullpen session, a 20-pitch bullpen session on March 21st. He threw a bullpen on March 23rd. I don't know how many pitches it was. He threw another bullpen session on the 26th. He continued throwing bullpens on the 28th and the 30th. And he was facing live hitters. He made a rehab start on April 6th. Had another rehab start, I think it was April 12th. And he threw 70 pitches on April 18th. And he was doing pretty well through April. No concerns. He was up to 79 pitches when he finally made his major league debut for the not his major league debut, but his season debut on April 24th. He pitched pretty well, and then in his third start, he said he was experiencing some shoulder stiffness. And he said, and then when they asked him about it, they said that, well, I started feeling the stiffness in Boston, and he was pitching against the Red Sox, and just kind of kept pitching through it. And then the next day it didn't respond well. It was definitely getting tight and stiffening up, and it didn't feel loose. It didn't feel smooth. And at that point, the Rays shut him down, and they got an MRI done. And now what they're saying is that he has a significant it says he has a torn labrum, and he's probably going to need season-ending surgery. So it's an interesting timeline because it doesn't sound like he was shut down for more than a few days. He just continued to throw through all the way through March, through most of April, while he was dealing with this shoulder tendonitis as it was diagnosed. And since, we're usually talking about elbows, today let's talk about the shoulder. Maybe you could, remind everyone about the labrum, its role in the pitching motion. Maybe you could comment a little bit on this tear and maybe how this could have been avoided.
Okay, well, there's some really good take-home messages and teaching moments here. And the first thing as a detective, so when pitchers call me with a problem, I'm asking them for exactly what you did. And by the way, Joe, you're amazing at the way you can, that you have every date and every day he threw, which is what I need pitchers to do when they first call me, because I need to establish a lot of different things. One is, what were they doing? But also, was there some error in what they were doing that could have led to a vulnerability that caused a problem to get so serious? So first, let me just, so everybody knows what we're talking about. When they diagnose shoulder tendonitis, that's like saying there's something wrong with my car, and you don't go any further. Well, is it your tire? Is it your door? Is it your gas tank? Is it your radio? Is it your window? Well, shoulder tendonitis means inflammation of some tendon in one of the muscles in the shoulder. This could have been an external muscle, like one of the deltoids. It could have been a rotator cuff muscle. Who knows what it was? So that's very general. But we do know that the shoulder, the acceleration muscles, are part of the shoulder. So with that being said, now, and just to jump to the end, the labrum is the specialized cartilage within the shoulder. So if you pull the bone out, there's cartilage inside, and it is a very serious kind of injury because the labrum is intertwined with all connective kinds of things, ligaments, etc. And when there's a tear, you get exactly what he said, tightness, and it doesn't feel smooth because there's a ball that is rolling around in the shoulder to make your movements, and the labrum is holding that ball in place, secured in the labrum. And if the labrum's torn, you don't have that security. But so that's generally what we're talking about with him. But when you were talking to me about his bullpen schedule, here's what I'm thinking. We've got a guy who in April is getting ready to face hitters, or sometime in March, whenever all those bullpens were, and he started going on an every other day bullpen schedule. Well, if he's on an every other day bullpen schedule, an adult pitcher can only throw 39 pitches with a one-day recovery. Now, how is a guy getting ready to face hitters when his pitch counts are limited to 39? The other side of that is, so let's say they're not limiting his pitches to 39 because it's a one-day recovery. How is he recovering from 50, 49, 55, 60, the way you would increase the load, if he's only getting a one-day recovery? And then all of a sudden you mentioned, here he is he's going in to face hitters, and, you know, he's got a warm-up bullpen of 25 pitches or so. I mean, so if a pitcher's giving me this report, and we're kind of determined, it's very important to determine why did this happen. Pitchers have to learn from their experiences. If a pitcher's giving me that timeline, I'm going to say, well, how were you recovering, or what pitch counts were you doing? So something sounds awry with that. Now, with that being said, the problem, the teaching moment here is, here's a guy who had a tendinitis, and I read an article, a quote by him, where he said he had tendinitis, or his shoulder was bothering him, and he, quote unquote, decided to pitch through it. So this is, again, a reminder of the topic we have discussed many times. Pitching through pain never turns out okay. You do not go from soreness to pain, continue pitching, and go, wow, the pitching really helped me. I'm not sore anymore, or get soreness. Now, you can feel better as you're pitching with pain in a tendon, because if the tendon gets warm enough, and if it's not too serious, it could feel like, oh, it's not hurting right now. But believe me, when you're done pitching and the next day, you'll know, and it'll get worse. So the rule is you cannot pitch through soreness and pain, because it just gets worse. So so there's the other teaching moment. The tendinitis, the pain, you cannot pitch through pain. So he went from having a tendon that was pulling on a bone to having a labral tear. Now, a labral tear is because some way that bone produced some force was actually pushing in on it and somehow tore it. And there are very specific mechanical flaws that cause the bone. Think about this. The round ball is sitting in something that looks like a half of a bowl. Okay? The way a golf ball sits on a tee, that's actually the way the shoulder sits in the shoulder. The bone sits in the shoulder. The bone is too big for what it's sitting in, and it sits right in there. If you start to have weird mechanics where that bone's hitting up on the edge, it starts fraying and then it tears. And so they should have looked at his mechanics. Now, I did try to find his mechanics, and I found a very bad video of a bullpen session, and you could only see his shoulders. But he was already displaying one of the errors that happens in mechanics, where the pitcher, as he strides out on his pitching arm, is in this very stretched, he leans back, he's very stretched, and he's putting severe, unnecessary stress on the shoulder at a time in a motion when he should not be putting stress on the shoulder. So even from a quick view, I saw something where if he's a guy that comes to me with tendinitis, I'm going to push him and say, you got to lean this way because this is what's hurting you, and it's a quick adjustment. So the next take-home message from this is early intervention and detection of the cause. If the body is getting sore, it's talking to you. If you then get diagnosed tendinitis, it's yelling at you. If it then tears, it's just plain old mad at you, and it's shutting you down because you won't listen. So never, ever think that this is I'm sore, or okay, I've got tendinitis. Okay, it'll go away and then I'll be fine. You need to look at what caused it. And there's always a reason, and there's tiny adjustments that can be made that usually solve most of the problems. So this is quite an interesting story, but the whole scenario sounds like it just sounds awful. And yes, labrum surgeries will be career-ending, but here's the deal. They just did some research, and in fact, Glenn was part of it. It's actually research he sent me after the show. And there now, once you have labral surgery, there are 2 to 3 to 4 specific mechanical flaws that will show up in the picture because the surgery itself changes the shoulder. And so the pictures are sort of, I don't want to say protecting it, but it's almost structural. And so the most important thing after labral surgery is to make sure that they do not fall prey to the tendencies that they will have, because that will cause pain. In fact, I'm dealing with a picture right now, post-labrum surgery, who for a year hasn't been able to throw. They found me, and sure enough, there he is doing all the things that make things worse. So it's been a whole year, and he hasn't been able to throw. So you've got to do the early detection, and if you end up with the surgery, you've got to do detective work then to make sure they're not throwing incorrectly, or it will just get worse.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't sound good. I think it's not so many, like you said, not so many pitchers come back from a torn labrum. I mean, even Johan Santana's been trying for the last 5 years, trying to come back from his tear, and I can't even think of any. Maybe Bartolo Colon. I can't think of any other pitchers that had that kind of injury and come back. So.
And
hopefully
they both look funny. And they both look funny when they throw. Both Colon and Santana had altered shoulder mechanics. Colon still throwing with altered mechanics, and Santana, look what happened to him. But both of them had altered shoulder mechanics from the surgery, and did not maybe didn't know, didn't bother, whatever, to ensure against those restrictions and to train to recreate normal mechanics, particularly when throwing. So both of them are an example of, if you don't handle it, they won't come back looking normal.
Yeah, they both look like, I mean, Bartolo Colon especially, I just watched them yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like he's throwing darts, like they tell catchers to throw from their ear. His hand comes so close to his ear, and it's like he's throwing like a dart game, like in a bar. It's crazy.
Yes. He's avoiding using his shoulder. He's using his elbow. So, yeah.
So, anyway, so clearly these Major League pitchers are not listening to our podcast yet, so we have to keep beating the drum and telling them to stop throwing through pain and stop throwing through injuries, because they're not listening, and hopefully one of these days they'll listen to our podcast and maybe, get the right idea. So let's move on to some positive things. You owe us an extra velocity segment because we didn't do one last week. You got off the hook because Dr. Fleisig ran a little later than expected. So believe me, I'm keeping an eye on you, and I'm making sure you're gonna fulfill your promise. So you're gonna give us 2 this week. How about 2 velocity tips?
Okay, and I'm feeling the pressure too. So anyway, so again, remind the listeners where they can get the photo from, Jill, because they're going to need to look at a photo for the first tip that I'm going to give.
Right. You can go to onbaseball.com. That's ONBASEBALL.com. Onbaseball, all one word, .com, and you'll see the fixed link right on the homepage, and you can see all the photos that are referenced in our podcast every week.
Okay, so what you're going to see is a 4-frame JPEG, and the photos on the left that stack up, they go together, and the bottom one is called before, and on the right side you will see after, and the photo above each one actually goes with the photo below. So this is a pitcher who does very well as a starter for a high school, and his father calls me and says all of a sudden he's missing. A few other errors were occurring, but something was really wrong. And he's in season. He had finally recovered and could get in a small bullpen before his next start. And he said, "Can you do any emergency work?" Of course, to try to find out what was going on. So today's tip is on the importance of the wrist. So just to remind everybody, when we do these correct motions and the most efficient way of doing them, you have the ability to have the highest velocity, but at the same time you have the ability to have the most efficient delivery. So while many pitchers don't do this, the point of this segment is to say there are many things within yourself that you want to be sure you're doing before you start running around trying to find gimmicks and things to make you throw harder. When researchers looked at what contribution the wrist made to velocity, while we can't know for sure this is accurate, they quantified it at 21% of the velocity. They said 21% of the velocity was contributed by the wrist. The wrist is the last joint, shoulder, elbow, wrist, in that order, with shoulder and elbow being sort of simultaneous, contribute velocity to the ball. The wrist is the last joint to impart velocity to the ball. The fingers do not impart velocity. The hand doesn't impart velocity. The forearm doesn't impart velocity. So the wrist is important. And I know all of you pitching guys know, be behind the ball, get behind the ball. And what that really means is, in kinesiological terms, is the action of the wrist has to be in a certain plane and has to happen a certain way for that fastball release. And what you see is sometimes with altered mechanics, you're going to see the wrist not be behind the ball. So if you look at the photo on the left, when I was filming him, and I'm looking for anything I can see because, again, I have to do detective work, and I've got 1 hour to find the clue and to fix it. I noticed, look on the left, he's coming into his max external rotation position, and his wrist is facing upward towards the sky, and his hand is in a perfect release position. Because he came through, look at the bottom photo, because he came through with the elbow, when you push the elbow forward without your having to do anything, the forearm makes a little bit of a rotation, and if you can see, his fingers now are on the side of the ball, and what that did is it caused him to miss, and it caused a funny spin on the ball. And that wrist position changed, not because he changed his wrist position, because he altered the way his shoulder worked, and he stuck the elbow out before his shoulder rotated. So, of course, when I saw this and showed him, he goes, oh, my hand, it looks funny. So we worked on it, and the photos on the right are what by the end of the session. So I want you to notice something. The top two photos, one which produced a good delivery behind the ball and one that didn't, they look the same. Yes, his elbow angle is different, but that has nothing to do with it. He actually was pitching so much better that his elbow velocity had increased. So notice that his hands and his wrist are in the same position. But in the bottom photo that's labeled after, notice how his wrist is releasing the ball correctly as a fastball. And you also, if you want to compare the bottom two photos, you can see how his elbow isn't protruding forward, and you can actually see that he rotated his shoulder forward, and his elbow was an afterthought in the middle between his shoulder and hand, and that is why the hand position changed. And, of course, by the end of the bullpen session, he was throwing strikes. According to my catcher, velocity had gone up, and I haven't seen him since, and his father's reporting that he's just, back to himself again. So the most important thing, once all is said and done, is to look at the wrist and to look at the hand to make sure that the ball is being released correctly. The symptoms of it not being released correctly are the things that you guys are the best at, seeing spin that looks funny or seeing misses that are very unusual and far and way outside. And that's what will tell you to take a look and make sure that the wrist is correct. And if you've got a pitcher that has altered arm mechanics and he's leading with the elbow, it's going to be hard for him to get behind the ball. So does that make sense to you, Joe?
Yeah, that does make sense. It's very clear with the photos especially. And it also, just to tie things together, what we've been doing for the last few weeks, it also looks like he might be getting over his front leg pretty well.
Yeah, he's getting over his front leg pretty well, and and he's a big guy. He's like he might be 6'5".
Yeah, that's great that you were able.
Yeah.
So,
and you can also see on the photo on the right, he had a nice little tilt to the side, and you just see the after photo looks good. It looks, everything. He was upright on the left, but the main thing is to understand that we want to take a look at the wrist. And what's unfortunate is a lot of times these classes and gimmicks that people come up with, well, you're going to throw hard if you spin around 10 times and then throw the ball to the wall, or you're going to do this or that. The weird thing is that when you're doing that kind of thing, you can't always control what's happening in the arm, and you can end up with faulty wrist mechanics. And if your wrist is going through unusual rotations, like his is on the left, it will start to produce forearm tightness, because the forearm is what rotates the wrist. And then you get the tightness, and for all you listeners, here's your big exam question. If you've been listening to me, do we want forearm tightness? No. The answer is no, because it leads to Tommy John problems. So mispositioning of the wrist doesn't just affect velocity, it affects health. And once again, we see that the things that are the most efficient are also the things that are the most healthy for the pitcher.
And also, I want to point out, as I like to point out all the time, making little tweaks and little changes to mechanics to correct flaws, they can be done. They should be done by the right people who know what they're doing, and it will just about always lead to not only better performance, but a better chance of preventing injury and pitching healthy. So that's great.
Yeah, and this was done in a 1-hour session, and he was doing a full bullpen. So, of course, I had to identify this in the first 10 minutes, had to work on it, and then had to have him leaving there, not just understanding it, but also performing well enough to where I knew it had cemented itself into his body. But, again, when you've got a good pitcher, he knows he's supposed to. What he did on the right, he had been doing, but he lost it because it's what happens. They lose it for one reason or another, or somebody makes an adjustment to their mechanics, like one of their coaches, and they don't realize the effect it's going to have on something else. So this is a before and after that occurred within an hour. So don't be afraid of adjustments. They're supposed to help, and that's what they do when they're done right. So now,
right, so that's a great tip, Angel. But I'm not going to let you rest on your laurels. What else do you have for us?
Okay. So I want to talk about. So let's review something here now, and this will tie in the wrist. So when we started with the velocity, I wanted to start sort of in order with the body, and everybody remembers. The pitcher starts sideways down the hill, he lands, and then he rotates in 3 pieces to get to this position you see in this photo, and then the top level of rotation sends his arm out, and his arm goes out, his wrist works correctly to deliver that fastball, and that's what we are all leading up to with all these tips on efficient mechanics. Now, one of the most important parts of having this happen is the glove arm. So when the pitcher is performing his stride going downhill, everyone knows the glove arm comes up to shoulder height, we hope. And as the body is turning to get into the max external rotation position, which if you're still looking at the photo, it would be the top 2 photos, the glove arm is actually rotating the body and assisting the trunk at moving the pitching arm forward. So if everybody kind of pictures either watching someone or if you've done it yourself, if you've ever climbed a vertical rope, as you pull with one arm, that one arm literally pulls the other side up. So the way the shoulder girdle works, it works kind of like on an axis where the way one arm moves affects the other arm. So in pitching, as the glove arm pulls in, the glove arm is actually pulling in to rotate the trunk. And a lot of times, and coaches see this real easily, you'll see a glove arm that starts pulling in too soon, and it's bringing the arm forward at the wrong time. So the importance of the glove arm is called a direction arm. I call it the steering wheel as well. The glove arm is the culprit in most errors I see in the pitching motion. The glove arm and the knee lift, to me, are the biggest culprits. So the glove arm is actually responsible for controlling correct rotation. So if the glove arm isn't at 90 degrees, meaning at shoulder height, and it should be at the same height as the pitching arm, you're going to have faulty rotation. So when you come into this max external rotation position, and as you can see, the pitcher is very squared up because his glove arm pulled in and helped him position himself perfectly so that he could, in fact, get behind the ball. So when you have a pitcher who has a glove arm that when you look at him from the front or from the side, you see tilting, you see a glove arm that goes higher that possibly blinds his view of the hitter, you see a glove arm that swings way out, or you see a glove arm that just pulls in an unusual way, know that that glove arm, that fault that you're seeing or the thing that you see that doesn't look right, know that it's not just affecting the way the glove arm is coming in. It's affecting the rotation. It's affecting the sideways lean that the pitcher gets as he delivers the ball. And, again, if you're looking at this photo, the after photo shows this pitcher leaning a little further to the left. That's a correct degree of lean. The one on the right, he was too upright. He was actually looking more like a sidearm pitcher. That glove arm is essential in keeping everything leaning and rotating correctly and allowing the pitching arm to do what it does. If the glove arm does something funky, it's affecting the complete delivery. So if you've got a pitcher and no matter what you do, you can't get him on line, aligned, his hand behind the ball, make sure you look at the glove arm. Everybody thinks it's just this arm that's hanging out or just going for the ride. No, it's controlling the front end mechanics in a huge way. So the glove arm pulling in allows this nice delivery with the wrist. So glove arm and wrist work together to produce efficient motion, which then, again, will produce, it'll give you the possibility of reaching your max potential with your speed of the ball.
Wow. Well, that was good, Angel. You made up for yourself after missing last week. I'll tell you what, in all my years of, coaching and playing and watching pitchers from behind the plate, I've seen a lot of crazy front arm, front glove, wild mechanics, the glove going all over the place, pulling the guy over toward first base or toward third base. It's nice to see what it's supposed to look like. So it's supposed to be like this. It's pretty good. That's a great tip. Thanks so much, Angel. That's fantastic.
Excellent. So I'm on track and I redeemed myself.
You are redeemed. Back to just one next week, okay? We'll give you a break. So I want to thank everyone again for listening to our conversation with pitching motion expert Angel Borrelli. If you want to learn more about Angel's background and how she takes pitchers to the next level, you should visit her website, gymscience.com, gymscience.com. It's where you can find tons of great free information and articles on pitching mechanics, injury prevention. You can find Angel's book, Engineering the Pitching Elbow, which is full of strength and conditioning exercises specifically for the elbow, and it includes a full program for keeping the arm healthy during the off-season and in-season. If you want to avoid those UCL tears, guys, get the book. And, again, that's gymscience.com. If you want to learn more about me, you can visit metstoday.com or onbaseball.com. Be sure to go to onbaseball.com for all the photos that we talked about in this podcast and others, and you can also get archives of our podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at onbaseball. Again, thanks so much for listening. We hope you learned something, and we wish you safe and effective performance on the pitching mound.